Joining me now, Wendy Patrick, attorney and political analyst, and Break Unger, senior political contributor to Forbes and the host of the podcast, The Pod Complex, and also a lawyer and legal expert in his own right. And I bring that up because
his own mind in his
own right, and fully credited by all the legal authorities that count. I bring that up because we have a lot of legal issues to dissect. But before we get into that, we have to discuss one of our most notorious lawyers here in the U.S. I think it's fair to call him that. Some developments regarding Michael Avenatti. He, of course, is the frequent critic of the president and the lawyer representing adult film star Stormy Daniels, as well as other women in the Kavanaugh case. Well, he has now reportedly been arrested for domestic violence charges. This has been reported by the Associated Press. It's reportedly involving his wife, a domestic dispute. And TMZ reporting on this, saying that he had kicked his estranged spouse out of the apartment. The details are still coming in. But Wendy, your initial reaction to this?
Well, I've been a prosecutor for 22 years. Please, nobody do the math. A long time. I've seen a lot of cases. And, you know, so much that comes out shortly after an arrest. You know, we really have to try cases like this in a court of law, not in the court of public opinion. I mean, when we get into a courtroom, there's going to be legal and evidentiary rules that's going to filter what the jury and the judge are allowed to hear. It's not going to be the free-for-all that no doubt is going on right now online. So I think even though, you know, people have their initial reactions, everybody certainly is speaking out the last hour, we've all got to wait and see the way this shakes out legally. You're surprised to hear me say that as a prosecutor, but I have to be that because you just never know until the facts actually come out.
There is one thing that we can speculate with some confidence. The campaign donations for his presidential race, I'm thinking they're drying up tonight.
You think?
I don't think it's looking so good all of a sudden.
Politically, the ramifications are far different than they are legally at this point, because you're right. Even the announcement of an arrest, that's why it's so dangerous. Just the fact that somebody was arrested can do exactly that politically. That's what we're seeing happen already for Avenatti.
Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, if you ask me.
The ink wasn't dry on the police report before lots of people spoke out saying, you know, he's not going to be speaking here now.
I hear your point, and thank you for being balanced and reasonable. But I think it's fair to speculate that President Trump is taking well to this news.
Oh, we should get some
That's not speculation.
Vintage tweets in the morning.
If they haven't whilst we've been on air. All right. Let's talk about some of the other legal issues, and we'll begin with what is happening in Florida. Now some attempts to change the laws, the signing laws, the deadline laws. Wendy, what is going on?
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Florida, because all day long people are going back and forth, either defending what's going on there or saying, oh, it's due to this or that, and should we really blame it on just this one woman? It is true that more people went to the polls than ever. The enthusiasm was bipartisan. It was great, and we saw momentum translate into math. But the counter argument to that is, shouldn't we have anticipated that big of a voter turnout because of everybody that registered and everybody that was talking about it and the lines? So they should have been prepared, particularly given the problems in the past. So you look at how many strikes, and should those things have been fixed, and should we be in a recount situation as we are now? Wendy's
analysis is actually spot on. It really is. Look, you have a couple things at work here. What you're addressing correctly is the length of time they need for a recount. They had not planned properly for the number of people who turned out, and that's what they're trying to deal with. The signature thing's a little trickier, because under the Florida law, if you're registered as Richard Edward Unger, that's my signature, and I go to vote and I sign it Richard Unger, well, that technically disqualifies my vote. And nobody's quite sure if that was the original intention. Here's the bottom line, though.
Rick, shouldn't you be disqualified if your signature doesn't match? Keeping in mind, you don't even have to show ID.
I understand.
At the very least, your signature should be an exact match, or as near
if the Richard and Unger match perfectly,
I don't know.
I'm not sure. But I'll tell you what the bottom line is. Everybody's getting crazy for nothing. There has never been a recount in the United States of America where tens of thousands of votes were overcome. And that's what we're talking about here. So we're going to go through all of this, and we should. Every vote must be counted. But I got to tell you, at the end of the day, Ron DeSantis is going to be governor, and Governor Scott is going to be senator.
But Wendy,
whether I like it or not.
Look, Wendy, the deadline for submitting the results are laid out in Florida law, and the push is now to change that. I mean, the law doesn't give the Secretary of State an authority to grant extensions. So
litigation leads to legislation. We always see that. Where there are lawsuits, there will be changes in the law. And precisely to avoid repeat performances of what we're seeing down in Florida. You know, lightning has struck there too many times, and we can continue to make changes and improvements so that we are not retrospectively saying, gosh, we should have seen this coming. What changes can we make? Maybe, like Rick says, this is one of them. If you can sign a portion of your name and you can leave out a middle initial.
I like that one, huh?
That's incredible. If that's
as someone that voted in the national and in the midterm elections, first 2 elections I voted at as a proudly minted American patriot, I was appalled by the lax regulations coming from third world parts of Africa, growing up in South Africa.
Here in New York, you
here in New
experienced
York,
that? What did you see that troubled you?
The fact that, okay, I know that no one asks for ID, that's a given, which was quite surprising that we can't even get that through. And the fact that there were ballots lying around everywhere. There were open ballots that I could have just picked up and filled out several times. So there certainly is need to correct a number of things here.
That's right, and it's these personal observations both of you have shared that many Americans are unaware of because it is tightly controlled in some jurisdictions. So what we really need is consistency nationally.
And probably
But
polling
this is a
station
state
to polling
issue.
station.
But this is a state issue. Should it become something that there's federal oversight for, Wendy?
Well, if there's a way to make it fair and prevent the kind of problems we're seeing now in Florida, that would be the argument for that. On the other hand, states want to retain their, they want to remain sovereign, and they want to have state by state, and how do we do it, and how does that really, they want to maintain the will of the voters, and how do they want to do it state by state? But there should be that kind of consistency. We can at least have consistency in more procedures than we do. Perhaps that's something we can think about between now and 2020.
What you can do is you could have a federal voter ID card. That you can do. But the federal government can't regulate state and local elections.
Yeah, they'd even be pushed back to the ID card.
Why don't we have a federal voter ID? To Wendy's point,
I don't
Democrats
object
pushback
to it,
says
never
it
did.
disenfranchises
No,
people.
I don't think it. As long as you don't make people pay for it, and as long as you set it up in a way where the identification you need is reasonable and takes into account certain special. There are people in this country who can't get their birth certificates. They were born at another time. You have to take those into consideration so you don't disenfranchise. But I have no allergic reaction to a national voter ID card.
We seem to get it done in less sophisticated parts of the world. Why wouldn't we be able to get it done here in the U.S.?
Well, I think the big disenfranchise argument is something we hear more often than anything, is if you're going to have these requirements, you have to have requirements that don't that really don't discriminate against the underprivileged that may not be able to come up with the requisite documentation. And that is just one example of some of the pushback. When you talk about federally, or even statewide consistency, how can we have the same regulations apply to everyone? There will always be groups of people that will say it's unfair, unfairly discriminates, and that's why we have the vastly different voting methods that we have in the U.S.
But I think we can all agree that some changes are in order. We're going to have
to that.
Well, certainly in Florida.
Yeah, certainly in Florida, if nowhere else. Rick, thank you so much. Rick Ungo, Wendy Patrick, a pleasure having you both with us.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.